Welcome to the beginning. You are standing in 26 Wooster Street, New York, New York, sometimes known as 24 or 28 Wooster Street, depending on which records you look up. Look towards the windows. Look specifically at the two with green triangles. If you are facing them, you are looking west. The street closest to your right is Grand Street. Look towards it. 2 blocks beyond that is Spring Street, named for the natural freshwater spring that used to run its path and still does underground today. The water is mostly contained by the New York sewer system now, but it is occasionally known to still flood basements in this area. Turn back to look straight. 8 blocks ahead of you, continuing west, is the Hudson River, and beyond that, New Jersey. But let's focus back here. Walking into this building today, alongside your feet were cobblestones. You can see them in front of you through the window now. Cobblestone streets are a trademark of Soho, and though not completely efficient in a modern world, the few remaining streets are preserved and protected, required by the city to remain intact as a testament to a different time. In the 1600s, what is now known as Manhattan was called New Amsterdam, and the Dutch West Indies Company occupied the entire city, including what is now considered Soho. To create a human barrier against increasing tensions with neighboring Native American tribes, they granted farmland and half-freedom to slaves and sent them here. This neighborhood was Manhattan's first free black settlement, known at that time as Land of the Blacks. Now turn away from the windows and look around. The museum calls this the living room, an affectionate term that just by title suggests coziness and comfort, something you might not feel if it were just called the lobby. Below your feet is carpet. Rub your feet around it and notice how different it feels from the rough cobblestones outside. Keep looking around. When we enter a space, it's difficult to imagine that it wasn't always meant to look like this, that there was another way, that every single element was a choice a small group of people made one day, and now all of us will only ever be able to know this room like this. There is a reproduction of a blueprint hanging on the wall on the right side of the room next to the vinyl wall text. Do you see it? Go closer. Where there is a yellow triangle is where you are standing now. In another time, when this was being made, no one would have ever predicted your life standing in that yellow triangle, but here you are. The space lined with green is a plan for a large auditorium. It's not clear when this plan was abandoned or changed in lieu of creating the main gallery that exists now, but we know without a doubt that if this green-lined space became the auditorium you see here, we might never have been invited to participate in this exhibition. Or if we would have, we wouldn't have made this audio tour. Or if we did, it wouldn't sound exactly like this, and our lives would have been different because of that, and therefore yours would too. Now feels like a good time to formally introduce who I mean when I keep saying we. We are Memory Foam. We are three people, and this is our exhibition.
And this is our exhibition.
You are in it right now. You've been in it the whole time. Its bounds are not as formally constructed like something you can see on a blueprint, but instead are dictated by this voice.
And this voice.
And this voice.
Which will guide you for the entire duration of the show. We have about 20 minutes left, so let's keep going. To the right of the welcome desk is the entrance to the main gallery. Go in. There are a lot of different things to see in here, but we promise you won't miss anything. First, take a look at the back wall to your right. You'll see 5 chairs lined up. Those are there for you. If at any point you need a break from the standing or walking, you can always go there, pause the recording, and sit. To the left of the chairs in the back corner, you should see a pile of bricks. There might be 200 or 100 or even just 2, depending on how many people have stepped here before you. Walk over to the bricks now. That's where we'll start. I'm going to continue to speak, but you can follow my footsteps while you move. At the turn of the 20th century, the Hudson Valley was the brick-making capital of the world, producing over 1 billion bricks a year and employing nearly 10,000 people in more than 120 brickyards. By the late 1970s, the once mighty molded brick industry was no more. Supposedly, this building you're standing in used to be a brick factory owned by a man named Joseph West. We say supposedly because some history is hard to uncover and harder still to trust. To the right of the pile of bricks are 3 pictures. When you Google Joseph West, these are the top 3 image search results. None of these men are the supposed Joseph West who ever owned the supposed brick factory in the very building you are standing in now. Take a look at the bricks and pick up your favorite. Hold the brick in your hands. Is it heavier than you expected? An average brick weighs 4.5 pounds. That's about the same as an average pineapple or 2 quarts of milk. Directly across the room, closer to the entrance you walked in, there are foam squares laying on the floor. When you have selected your brick, hold it in your hands and walk over there. The tape you see are guides we made, some arbitrary and some with direct reference to the urban planning of this neighborhood. When you get to the other side, we want you to choose a space to lay your brick. It's important you only lay the brick on the foam, but that's the only rule. Other than that, you can place it however you want. On the tape directly, beside it, perpendicular to it. You can even stack your brick on another brick if you want to. In fact, we'd love that. New York City's demand for bricks skyrocketed after a night watchman noticed smoke coming out of a dry goods store in the city's business district in December 1835. Although 1,000 firemen fought the blaze for 16 hours, it burned more than 52 acres of the city and destroyed 674 buildings. The American Institute of Architects' Guide to New York calls Soho
an intersection of brick and glass searching for an identity.
Sometimes it can feel like neighborhoods are searching for their identity via the parts that make them up, from the things that we use to build them. When you place your brick down, you are contributing to a kind of identity of architecture just within this museum, just within the scope of these foam squares. When you walk away and come back, will you still recognize your brick? Or will it have already blended together with all that is around it, and you'll just know that you're a part of that? Have you finished placing your brick yet? You can make a snap decision if you want. No one will know. In the center of the room, there is a light pink table with papers and images on top. Look up from the bricks and find it. Walk over to the table. You can follow my steps if you want. There are many things scattered here. You can go through them while you're listening to me, touch them, even pick them up. There is one in particular that we want you to start with. It has red borders. It's the only one, so you should find it easily. This page is a detail from a book called
Fast Man's Directory and Lover's Guide to the Ladies of Fashion and Houses of Pleasure in New York and Other Cities.
A notably long title. In the mid-1850s, Soho was considered Manhattan's first red light district, and pocket-sized booklets like these were made to map and then review the various brothels in town. A sort of underground pre-Yelp rating system to tell you which woman and where. There is a page on the table that has a blue border all around it. Try and find it now. This one is a map showing all the brothels that were once on Mercer Street, a street just 2 blocks east from where we are right now. By the early 1870s, the theaters were moving uptown and the sex work moved with them. I say sex work, but in doing so, I'm rewriting history by swapping a language that wasn't built yet. It wasn't until the 1980s that a woman named Carol Lee coined the term sex work, saying, quote, "The usage of the term sex work marks the beginning of a movement. It acknowledges the work we do rather than defines us by our status." Historically, prostitute refers to a woman into a state of female sexual dishonor. Prostitute would have been the word used to describe those who worked at a brothel in Soho in 1850. There is a picture of Carol Lee in the stack in front of you. She has big curly red hair, and she changed the world by asking us to reconsider the words that we use while in it. By the early 1900s, upper-class New York continued to shift uptown, and the exploding immigrant population came down, offering themselves as cheap labor to work in Soho's newly earned reputation as a manufacturing and commercial district. By the 1950s, the artist communities came too. Tracing history is exhaustive and selective. There are parts we skipped in bringing you up to this point, and there are parts we missed because some stories never get recorded. But nevertheless, looking backwards is important. And understanding a history provides context for a present, and when the artist communities moved into Soho, Charles Leslie and Fritz Lohman came with it. There is a picture of two men by the water in the stack you're looking through. The man on the left is wearing flip-flops. Both of them have the first 3 or 4 buttons undone on their shirts. It's a nice day, and they're looking right back at you in the photo. The man on the left is Charles Leslie. On the right is Fritz Lohman. In 1969, these two men put on an exhibition out of their Soho loft on Prince Street featuring 13 artists, out of which 11 were gay. Defying all expectations, the show completely sold out. We have pictures reproduced from the opening on the table in front of you. Try and find them, and imagine what it might have been like to be there that night. After the success of that first show, Leslie and Lohman continued hosting exhibitions featuring mostly gay and erotic art. At the time they were showing this work, no one else was. Artwork, like language, expands what is possible and makes room where there wasn't before. The story of their first apartment show on Prince Street is a prelude to a movement and a tidal wave of access that you're standing inside of right now. Don't lose sight of that, and as we go forward, let's keep looking back. In 1987, during the height of the AIDS crisis, Leslie and Lohman became increasingly invested in the activism surrounding gay liberation and decided to form a foundation. It took a team of lawyers and relentless persistence to make that foundation, but in 1990, the Leslie Lohman Gay Art Foundation was born and marks the first instance of the word gay appearing in the federal government's registry of not-for-profit organizations. Are you still looking through the photos in front of you? There is another one I want you to look at with me. It's a drawing. It kind of looks like a dystopian parking garage for some faraway future. It has a purple border. You may have already looked at it before while standing here, but pick it up again now. Upon closer look, you'll see a highway that runs across the bottom and through the center. This is a drawing of Lower Manhattan. When looking back at the history of a place, it's easy to gloss over and forget the parts that nearly never made it. The things that we almost lost, the people we came close to failing. In your hand is a rendering commissioned by Robert Moses to illustrate his dreams for how Lower Manhattan could look. This dream never actualized, but it's important to mention because the story of its failure is the championing of an entire population, culture, and history. Robert Moses worked for the New York City government from 1927 through 1974. His legacy is long, and the work he did is still deeply entrenched in many parts of this city's DNA. For right now, though, we're only going to talk to you about the ideas he had related to that picture. We're going to move from this table, but before we do, look at that drawing one more time, just to keep it in your mind. Now put it down.
And look up.
A few feet away, towards the right side of the gallery, there is a purple sandbox.
Go towards it.
The first supposed American sandbox was made in 1855 in Boston. A group of female philanthropists organized a pile of sand to be poured in the yard of a chapel so children could play during the summer. The past 30 years have seen a decline in public sandboxes, but the idea extends, applied to any bounded environment that offers freedom to explore and construct, to smash and build again.
We built
the sandbox
for you.
I'm going to continue to talk, but while I do, we want you to play. Stick your hands deep in the sand and feel around. When was the last time you've done that? Does it feel good?
Does it feel uncomfortable to be an adult with your hands in a sandbox?
There are sand molds here. They're there for you. If you want to build, you can use them. If you want to destroy something that might have been built before you got here, you can do that too. The only rule is that you keep the sand inside the box and wipe your hands as soon as you're done with the towels we have attached. Don't forget, this is a museum after all. Now think back to that drawing. The concept for a highway in Lower Manhattan dates back to the opening of the Holland Tunnel in 1927. The idea was to construct a highway connecting the tunnel to the Manhattan Bridge, allowing smoother traffic into Brooklyn, releasing pressure on neighborhoods like Soho, with narrow streets that clogged easily. The plan delayed, then stopped, then changed, and then ultimately became what is known as the Lower Manhattan Expressway, or more commonly known as Lomex. That dystopian drawing you were looking at is an early concept for Lomex. Taped on the closest wall to the sandbox is a black and white photo of a three-dimensional city model. If you are facing the back of the gallery, it will be on your right. Don't go over there, just look at it.
Have you found it?
I know it's a few feet away, but you don't need to see the details of it. Just looking for a moment will be enough. By 1955, Moses had determined the path for his 8-lane highway. This image is a rendering to illustrate that more clearly, to show just how much space this would occupy. Moses planned for the superhighway to be elevated and follow a route to Brooklyn just north of Broome Street. Do you remember in the beginning when we asked you to look out the windows? The street on the right was Grand. 1 block beyond that is Broome. Close your eyes and imagine an 8-lane superhighway towering above you 1 block away. Imagine the noise. Imagine how the light would be different, how those blocks of darkness would feel. Imagine this entire neighborhood, what would have been lost. You can open your eyes now. In 1968, a woman named Jane Jacobs is credited as being the main force in defeating Lomex. Jacobs was a journalist, author, and activist whose legacy in the city matched that of Moses. There was a picture of her on the pink table. It was black and white, she had glasses on, and she was holding stacks of paper in both arms beside her head. Can you visualize her? 1,972 families and 804 businesses were set to be displaced by Lomex, and it was for them that Jacobs fought so adamantly against it. In 1968, at a public meeting in the Lower East Side to solicit feedback for Lomex, Jacobs took the microphone and amongst cheers from her supporters gave an impassioned speech against the project, eventually getting arrested that night. Her arrest drew even more attention on Lomex and is what eventually convinced the then mayor, John Lindsay, to withdraw his support, ostensibly killing it for good. Most of us aren't in the business of deciding what gets built and what gets taken away. Some things need to be destroyed in order to be saved or brought back better, maybe more fair. Some things are changed at the expense of something else that once it's gone can never be rebuilt. It's not always clear how to grow without burning down what came before, or what's worth losing in the continual quest to try and be better. Towards the back of the gallery, there are 3 different-sized orange pedestals. We're going to go there next. Move slowly and take your hands out of the sand. Rub them together to get off as much excess as you can, and don't forget to use the towels. While you're doing this, look back at the sand that you were just in. What did you do there?
Did you build up and break down and try again? Did you draw lines to make borders to proclaim what is yours?
Will you feel disappointed if by the time you reach the end of this guide, you look back at the sandbox and someone destroyed that thing that you made? Take your time cleaning up, and when you're ready, go ahead and walk to the pedestals. We're almost at the end now, and so let's go back and look closer at the beginning. Before Lomex and Soho and even the comprehension of New York City, Manhattan was an island inhabited by the Lenape Native Americans. In 1524, a Florentine man was the first European to explore the island. In 1626, it was sold to a Dutch one named Peter Minuit. Manhattan was sold to him by Native Americans in exchange for traded goods that amounted to 60 guilders, or what would allegedly be considered $24 in today's currency. There are many historians who contest what the equivalence of 60 guilders would be now, or even further, any of the facts of this supposed transaction.
Have you made it to the pedestals yet?
If so, you can get near them, but resist the urge to touch, or taste for that matter. We can't know exactly what the so-called traded goods that amounted to 60 guilders were, though we should be clear off the bat and say they absolutely were not bananas, so don't let these piles mislead you into thinking that's where we're going with this. We also can't say who collected from that trade, who stood to benefit, or what they lost. The difficult part, though, isn't so much the facts of this story. Would it feel different if we told you Manhattan was sold for what would amount to $14,000 now? What about 5? Is there a right amount that makes that trade feel fair? Does it make a difference to you to know that Manhattan is worth more than $60 billion now, and what does that number mean to you?
Do you feel like you factor in it? Does it include the work that you've done here?
Does it include your body? Each of the 3 pedestals are holding what amounts to $24 worth of bananas. Each pile's bananas were purchased from a different place. There are receipts taped on each pedestal proving this transaction, operating like a contract giving us the rights to all ownership. Each pedestal represents the total amount of goods traded for the island of Manhattan in 1626. Declaring something's value is complicated and inevitably linked to who gets to make that call and in comparison to what. There are about 20 million distributed bananas in New York City each week. We have about 130 here. 3 different vendors declared these values 3 different ways. Does one pedestal feel more correct? How do you negotiate the worth of the things in your life? There's only one more place you haven't been. On the back left side of the gallery, there is a seesaw and a video being projected behind it.
Go there. We're in the last few minutes now.
In 1655, a young Native American woman took a peach from an orchard on a Dutch settlement along the Hudson. The settler who lived there was a man named Henry Van Dyke, and when he caught her taking the peach, he shot and killed her. Shortly after, an alliance of tribes launched a large-scale attack on the Dutch colonies along what would now be considered Lower Manhattan. This conflict is referred to as the Peachtree War. Historians since have doubted the claim that the stolen peach and namesake of the war is the true cause of that first attack. As could be predicted, there were many underlying contentions at play between the colonizers and the tribes who were there before them. With that in mind, the woman who was killed for taking a peach feels parallel anyway to issues of ownership and belonging, which undoubtedly reaches a core emotion that may have inspired this war and many conflicts since. In some ways, tracing the war to the peach feels like a simple explanation that doesn't allow for the nuance and truth of reality. In another way, its compression illustrates the power of one decision in changing many. It's not possible to measure the meaning of one thing we do versus another, what it says about you that you chose the brick you did, or how the way you placed it will influence those who follow you. Even if the peach was not responsible for starting the war, it is for inspiring the name, and therefore that choice lives immortally, without a way for us to quantify its effect or power. We made the seesaw and put 2 stacks of equal quantities of the same print on each side. Each print has a small individual weight, but enough for the balance to shift if one side has much more or much less than the other. Pick a side and take a print for yourself. Your choice may not alter the balance now, or it might contribute to doing so later today or later this week. You won't be able to know for sure, and we can't tell you what the choice you make will say about you, or how that decision will affect the future. Without looking at a microscope, it's easy to dismiss the gravity of one small choice you make in a museum in Soho on a day like today. But if everyone makes that same choice as you did, the balance can shift, and our piece will be forever different because of it. When you take the print, you can keep it. It's something for you to remember us by. We're at the end now. You've been with us for nearly 25 minutes already. Soon, perhaps in just a few minutes, you'll take this headset off and walk outside to Wooster Street. When you open the door and walk down the stairs, do you know where you're going? Maybe it will be sunny and you'll sit for a minute to decide that you want to take the longer route, to enjoy that feeling of sunshine on your shoulders. Or maybe it will be gray and you'll feel distracted, wanting to rush back to that next thing that you have today. Either way, these 25 minutes might begin to feel like they're fading away, but next time somebody asks you about Spring Street, you might treat it differently knowing what is running beneath. The places we go become larger the longer we look at them, and there is a landscape of memory that runs just as deep as the earth beneath it. In talking to you now, we've only scratched the surface of something much deeper, of stories with much more to say. The value of returning to what was always familiar is that you end up uncovering what you might have missed the first time. In this point of departure, we hope you found a new place to start.